Need a hand with that, Robert? Is that?
Maybe he'll get it on the boxes.
Did you figure it out? Who's good?
Well, maybe I'll sit behind him.
As long as you don't kick his seat.
No.
That's a good place. Good afternoon, everybody. While they're getting hooked up and getting his audio ready to go, I wanted to introduce you to Robert Gallardo. He is a biologist, a naturalist, ornithologist, all the things related to birding, butterflies, all of that thing. And I had the honor of meeting him earlier in June. I'm the executive director of the Missouri Conservation Heritage Foundation, and we have helped sponsor a couple of his books, actually. And so the Birds of Honduras, which was written in 2015, and then the Butterflies of Honduras, which was just released this summer. And I had the privilege of traveling to Honduras to help, talk during his book launch ceremony. So it was very exciting to see his property, beautiful, beautiful preserve in Honduras, next to Lake. I'm not going to say it right. Lake
Yehoah.
Yeah. See, exactly. And again, very beautiful. And we're very glad to bring him here today to talk about birds. Of course, we share a lot of migratory birds, so it's extremely important. Well, why would Missouri be interested in Honduras? Well, because our birds overwinter in Honduras, and it's extremely important to make sure that we protect where these birds are overwintering, so that they can come back to us in the spring and summer. So anyway, I would like to introduce Robert and let him have a chance to talk about his beautiful, Honduras. And I also wanted to mention, Robert is from California. He was in the Peace Corps and went to Honduras to serve, and he never left. 30 years he was in Honduras, and again, he's never left because he loved it so much. So, and he'll tell us why. Thank you, Robert.
Thank you, Tricia. So, it's a pleasure being here again at the Runge Center. I was here many years ago, giving a presentation to great people like you. So I want to thank Liz and Jean for hosting me. Great hospitality at their house. Last year I stayed with Rick and his family. Last time I first stayed with Rick and them. And I gave several presentations while I was here in Missouri. And I've also had the great fortune to work with Brad Jacobs, the late Brad Jacobs. He was my second bird mentor when I was working on the first bird book for Honduras. So I've been able to work with quite a few people here in Missouri throughout the years. Some people have retired from different agencies as well. And so when we started working on this butterfly book, we actually finished this book, I decided I was going to come back up to Missouri. I've been up in the U.S. for almost 3.5 weeks now. Spent most of my time in Texas. And I decided I'm going to come up to Missouri and meet new people and meet a lot of the people that I haven't seen in many, many years. And to go bird watching yesterday, saw white-throated sparrow, which was a lifer. So probably a yard bird to many of you people. So it's a pleasure being back here, presenting the Birds of Honduras, some of the work I've done over the past almost 30 years. And at the very end, some of the work that Olivia and myself have been undertaking over about the past 7 years. So there's been kind of a shift in what we've been doing in terms of working in the field. And we'll touch up on that at the very end of the presentation. So everybody can hear me okay? Okay. Send. That should be it. We tried this earlier, it worked.
Never fails.
That's the laser.
Sarah's still
Yeah, I'm gonna.
So,
Thank you.
yeah, we tried it earlier and it worked. That was strange. Is there a manual? No, there's no manual. I think you might have to get Sarah. This is for the lights.
Sarah's coming, she's getting Sarah.
Okay, so while Sarah gets here, the technician, we're just filling a little bit of time here. So as Tricia said, I went down to Honduras as a Peace Corps volunteer in 1993 after graduating from Humboldt State University in California. And during my 3 years of service there, typical service is 2 years. And my first 2 years I worked with a national park, kind of central eastern Honduras, and I was appointed a government counterpart. We did what you could do with the resources you had, and so I was teaching them how to bird watch, especially warblers, migrant wood warblers. We did some trail work. And then I was pulled off that project, and it was just all coincidental that another Peace Corps volunteer found this file in a file of the projects with another nonprofit, and it happened to be the installment of a butterfly farm. So some people were in the San Diego Wild Animal Park.
So that's the next slide, right?
Right.
But I didn't do it quicker.
Right, so how can you do with this?
I'm just clicking the mouse.
Okay. So I'm not going to touch it yet. So I was pulled off the one site, and I went to very remote eastern Honduras to help a community establish the very first butterfly rearing facility in Honduras. And so in fact, it turned out to be the very first project of its kind in all of Peace Corps history. And it was nominated for an award in Washington there and didn't win, but they started exporting butterfly pupa to the San Diego Wild Animal Park. So it was a very, very fulfilling project. And so that'll kind of get back to the very end of the presentation when I tell you a little bit about our butterflies. So a lot of times we all have our beginnings as children and our love and passion for nature, whether we put out bird seed to attract birds to our yards, whether we go on trips overseas to see all the beautiful places still left in the world, and in extreme cases, such as mine, who've dedicated our entire lives to living and working overseas in conservation and nature tourism, which is probably one of the most difficult things you could do in the world, I think. Very, very difficult. So, but in my childhood, I got started with butterflies at the age of 10. That's me you see up there with a net. And I had my first bird experience when I was in 8th grade in zoology class in Southern California. We went into class and the whole side wall was all glass. And we were in the foothills, and so there were lots of trees. I looked out the window, and there was this bird sitting there. And I go, look, a western tanager. And all the kids looked out the glass window. Mr. Bryson was a teacher. He looked out the window, saw this bird sitting on a low branch in a pine tree. Then they all looked at me and didn't say anything. Probably thought I was crazy. But I remember having books that my parents bought me as a young person. The early, I think it was Audubon series that had photographs in them, wildflowers, birds, and butterflies. So those kind of books had a very early influence in my life. And we'll see as we get later on, those kind of things are very, very important in the lives of children. So anyway, I talked about Peace Corps. I went into Peace Corps and served for 3 years. There's me a few pounds lighter in that picture. And so a lot of people, when you mention Honduras, there's all kinds of images that come up anywhere from things like the Banana Republic, the Contra Affair, and now it's the caravans of people going up. And now we have the president, the former president, and his brother in jail in the U.S. They were extradited. So you hear mostly bad things about this fairly poor Central American country, but that's not why we're here. That's not why I live in Honduras. There's many beautiful things there. So Honduras is 43,000 square miles, about the size of the state of Tennessee. So quite a bit bigger than Missouri. And so when we get down to the actual birds themselves, we have a lot of affinities with the North American birds. And as most of you know, the vast majority of birds that breed up in the boreal forest and the Arctic throughout much of North America, they leave because there's no food. So they have to migrate somewhere. And so they're not migrating to these faraway places to reproduce. They're migrating just to survive the northern winter. And so a lot of people, I won't say a lot of people don't care, but they just they hope that they come back. So now they come back to wherever you live in the States or in Canada, they're going to come back and breed. But you got to remember, a lot of these birds, we have some species of birds in Honduras, in particular our property, that are there 9 months of the year. Like yellow-bellied flycatcher that breeds in the boreal forest, breeds up north. It is the first to come and the last to go. Water thrush is another one. So those birds have to go somewhere, and it's not these cosmopolitan areas. They're finding natural habitats of all varying degrees of sizes, where they need to find enough to feed on, to overwinter, and build up just enough fat reserves to be able to get back to North America, whether they're flying over the Gulf or they're coming up Mexico. And so, working with the Birds of Honduras for more than 20 years, what we've seen is, and the pattern is that that's too small. So, most birds from west of the Rockies migrate down the western part of the U.S. all the way down through Mexico, and a lot of them end their normal distribution in western Honduras. So things like Townsend's warbler and hermit warbler. Species that are east of the Rockies, some of them make a big jump all the way to South America, but a lot of them funnel down all the way to Texas area, the southern coast of the U.S., and then they'll make a jump. A lot of them make a jump to Yucatan or to Cuba, and then filter down to the rest of Central America. Some follow the Gulf Coast. So I'll show you a couple of examples here from eBird. So this is a sample of eBird for the Townsend's warbler. So that's a bird west of the Rockies. So how many people here have seen Townsend's warbler in Missouri? Exactly. Probably a very rare strain. So that's one of the species that migrates all the way down through Central America. And by the time you get way, way down in southern Mexico, these are all overwintering birds. And you can see that there's a bunch of purple blocks in Costa Rica, but if you open up eBird, that's one bird. But you have thousands of bird watchers in Costa Rica, so they're going to find that one bird. So those blocks really don't represent the true wintering range of the Townsend's warbler. But if you open up some of these blocks in Honduras, you'll see that these are all mountainous areas, and 3 or 4 or 5, sometimes sightings per marker. And so this is an area in Honduras that is directly west of us. There's one particular park up here, the green marker, that's almost 9,000 feet. And so Townsend's warbler is one that ends its typical wintering range in western Honduras and northern Nicaragua, and we'll get to why in just a minute, because it's habitat related. And so now we go to one of your birds. So this is a Kentucky warbler, and you can see all the dots again, and so what you see all the way down to Costa Rica and Panama is valid because they do winter that far south in fair numbers. But what we find is that most of the breeding birds east of the Rockies are overwintering in lowland to mid-elevation habitats. So it's lowland rainforest and mid-elevation rainforest. Most of those we do not find what we call in montane or in cloud forest conditions. So you see all these dots around here. These are all very low areas to mid-elevation areas. And these, obviously, these dots don't represent anything that have to do with the actual quality of the habitat. They're just eBird reports. And of course, all the river raptors, all the Mississippi kites, not all of them, the vast majority of broad-winged hawks and Swainson's hawks, these things gather literally by the millions, all the way down to southern Texas, and they make their way down the Gulf Coast of Mexico, through Central America, and most continue down into South America. But we have a fair number of broad-winged hawks that do overwinter in Mexico and Central America. So a lot of people think that anywhere south of here is all jungle and steamy and hot and sticky, but that's not quite true. Central America has a huge diversity of habitats, and we're going to show you some of them here. This is Pico Nito National Park. A few of you have visited. So if any of you have a copy of the bird book, and there's one here also to look at, in the back there's a big fold-out map, and it's a rough representation of the major ecosystems in Honduras. And so unlike countries to the south of us, especially Costa Rica and Panama, those two countries were formed by the movement of two tectonic plates. And so the Caribbean side and the Pacific side are pretty neatly divided by mountain ranges that snake through both those countries. And so you can typically say, I'm going to see that kind of bird on that side and that kind of bird on the other side. Well, once you start getting up to northern Nicaragua, get to Honduras and Guatemala up here, these countries don't follow that rule because they were formed by the crushing of three tectonic plates. And so we don't have those neatly defined mountain ranges that just snake across the country. So we have mountain ranges that run east and west. So like this brown represents the highest, some of the highest mountains in the country. We have mountain ranges that run diagonally north-south, isolated mountain ranges everywhere. So the topography and geology of the country is extremely, extremely complex. And so we all know that those create the conditions, the soil conditions, which dictate the plant types, the types of birds are there, the butterflies, etc. So it makes it a very challenging and interesting place to work, trying to figure out who is where, what is where, and all that. Just deciphering that is probably many lifetimes of work. So one other thing we'll show you here that's really interesting, it's not unique to Central America, but that big green, olive green area in the east is pine grass savanna. And it's shared with Nicaragua. There's a little piece up in the Yucatan. But that one habitat alone shared with Nicaragua is 6,000 square kilometers. So it's like a big Everglade system. We'll show you a picture in a minute. So you can see most of the country runs along the Caribbean. And then down here is a little tiny Pacific spot on the Pacific coast, the ocean, with El Salvador and Nicaragua down to the south. We also have, along the Caribbean coast, 3 main Bay Islands. So it's a very important overwintering place for many seabirds. And we also have the Yucatan woodpecker, just junk population. Then we have, as I showed you in the Pacific, we have one of the largest concentrations of waterfowl I have seen anywhere. So we have waterfowl that comes from all of North America, anywhere from storks and pelicans, spoonbills, you name it, ducks, and they mix in with the resident waterfowl. So you can go there at this time of year and you can see tens of thousands of birds. It is spectacular. We used to do a lot of surveying down there, and we found many country records there, a lot of shorebirds especially. One time we counted a flotilla of 5,000 American white pelicans, a massive amount, and not just one species. So you go from one vernal lagoon to the other, and there's shrimp farms and just tens of thousands of birds down there. Really incredible place. See up to 5 jabiru storks in one day in one place. So here's the pine savanna that's out in eastern Honduras. Not really a big place for overwintering birds, except for like palm warbler, for example. One of the races of yellow-throated warbler, but things like vermilion flycatcher, very common there. Black-throated bobwhite. That's just a typical scene there of what that part of the country looks like. And in this region, as well, is the only place that is known where scarlet macaws actually breed in pine trees. So most people think macaws and those kind of things only breed in the rainforest, and they do in Honduras, but they also use pines that are probably not even bigger than 14 inches in diameter. As long as there's a hole in there, they utilize nest. And there's an American vet that works down there, works in all the neotropics, and she started a program there to actually start to rescue or protect scarlet macaw sites in situ. So before her, all these nests were being robbed. There was a huge black market trade of all these fledglings going into the Caribbean for people that afford to pay for these birds. And so she turned the whole thing around and has protected over 100 scarlet macaw nests. So she turned a bunch of poachers into the rangers, and they still have to combat people that come from other villages and stuff, but they do a rotating patrol system and everything. So they have almost 100% success rate now, protecting scarlet macaws in situ, and it's the biggest program of its kind in all of Latin America for the scarlet macaw. So rainforest is typically divided into 3 sections. You have lowland rainforest, which is in the lowlands up to about 700-800 meters, about 2,500 feet. And you go to mid-elevation rainforest and what we call cloud forest. But it's all rainforest. Not in all cases is it broadleaf forest. So we'll show you here in a minute. So the lowland rainforest like this, from the north coast of Honduras, is very important for migrating birds, especially for wood thrush, Kentucky warbler, hooded warbler. Those are the kind of things that will be thick in these lower stretches of this kind of forest. Move up the mountain a bit, you get into mid-elevation rainforest. It's still picking up quite a few migrant species there that overwinter in this habitat. And then finally, you get up to the highest stretches of mountain, 7,000, 8,000, 9,000 feet. You get into cloud forest, which it's also rainforest. And there, that's when the migrating species really drop out, except for the ones that are west of the Rockies. So the typical photo here. This is all broadleaf forest down in the lower valley. Then you get into some pines and pine oak forest embedded in here. Just photos of resident cloud forest species. This is a scene from another part of Honduras, a favorite place that we go to, and you can see that is all pine oak forest. And there's also broadleaf there as well. So this is a place where I showed you on the eBird map that is really thick with species like hermit warbler, Townsend warbler, and sometimes red-faced warbler. Mangrove forests are very common on the southern coast. And the north coast, this is a very big old mangrove forest. Prothonotary warblers, one that you see in there quite often. Wetlands, this is my home, Lake Yahoa. So birds that you find thick in there would be willow flycatcher is one, common yellowthroat, and this type of habitat are also very, very common. And believe it or not, we have places that look like Arizona. This is in Honduras. The columnar cacti, prickly pear, everything's thorny, everything's xerophytic, everything's there to poke you, just like in southern Texas or Arizona. Not particularly a overwintering place for migratory birds, but all home for the only endemic bird we have, which is a hummingbird. And then beach and ocean, kind of like the Bay Islands, you get a lot of migratory birds there that overwinter along the beaches. So bird families, so getting down to a little more the nitty-gritty, there's almost 250 bird families in the world. When AOU gets done, maybe it'll be 400, I don't know, nobody knows what they're doing. So we get into families specifically, there's 77 bird families represented in Honduras. And so we're going to look at a few of those. So as I mentioned, the Honduran emerald is the only endemic bird found in the country. Years ago, it used to be on the critically endangered list. It was collected, I think, in the 1800s. Nobody had seen it for almost 100 years. They thought it disappeared. And I think it was Steve Howell that rediscovered it. And it didn't take long for it to be posted on the critically endangered list, and it held up road projects where it lived. But eventually they found more and more populations of these things. They found them living in pine oak forests, and so they're not critically endangered. I think they're at least been listed down to endangered or threatened, so we're happy that they're not going anywhere yet. So I lumped these two families together, the falcons and the hawks. Almost 50 species, including we have crested eagle and harpy eagle, all three hawk eagle species. Quails and all their ally. This is probably one of our most emblematic birds, and the reason why it's on the cover of the book along with the endemic hummingbird is because this used to be a ghost bird. So as I talk about some of the history of the field work, this was a bird that was off the radar of the birding world. So this is the sister species of your Montezuma quail, which is found in the southwest of the country, all the way down towards southern Mexico. It's got a huge range. And so most people, a lot of people have seen Montezuma quail. And you look at this, oh, it's a Montezuma. No, it's not. This is the sister species that ranges almost, it comes very close to Montezuma, and then ranges down to northern Nicaragua. And it lives in pine oak forest. But at least when I started doing the field work, no single company or guide offered this bird to the birding community. And so nobody knew where to see it, how to see it. And so almost nobody had this on their life list, this beautiful bird. So, and I'll show you again a little later, when I started doing intense field work, I had a book as a monograph of the Birds of Honduras, went in there, looked at where the specimens were collected, and went to many of those sites and found out that bird is actually common throughout most of Honduras and sometimes in people's backyards. And then I started going to bird fairs. I went to the British Bird Fair where I had a stand. I printed this exact photo and had it up on the back wall. And a couple of Brits came up interested in going to Honduras. They look at that photo and they say, "Where was that taken?" I was going, "Well, in Honduras." Have you seen that bird? "Yeah." They go, "Wow, they didn't even think that bird existed." It was literally one of the holy grail birds of Central America. And so a lot of people who've seen this bird have come to Honduras, either with myself or some of the guides I've trained. A wonderful little bird that lives in pine oak forest. Crepes and rails, 11 species. We have almost every single species at the lake where I live. Of course, they're hard to see, a lot of them. Shorebirds, 25 species, most of which are migratory from all across North America. Only the collared plover breeds in Honduras. Parrots and allies, 16 species, including 2 species of macaws. I told you about the scarlet macaw program, but in eastern Honduras, we have a huge population of great green macaw. So that one is not trafficked so much because it's not very pretty for people who want a caged bird. So like when Gene floated the Rio Platano with it, whatever year that, 2010, way back when, we saw a lot of great green macaws in the rainforest. So a great stronghold for a gorgeous bird. Cuckoos, this is the lesser roadrunner. You have the greater, this is just a little bit smaller. Owls, a lot of great species up there too, including regional endemic that's only found from southern Mexico into Honduras. It's a cloud forest owl that looks and sounds like your barred owl. It's the same genus. Night jars and portwills, 11 species. This is a common paraki. So you have a couple of your species from North America that migrate and overwinter into Honduras. I think we're up to 44 species of hummingbirds right now, so that figures off, including our endemic Honduran emerald. A lot of these species are found in mid-elevation and up in the highlands. Trogons, we have 8 species, and this includes the resplendent quetzal. I couldn't ever say for certain, but we probably have more quetzals than Costa Rica and Guatemala combined. Quetzals are everywhere in the country. And there are some places when there's a certain type of fruit, a tree fruiting, you can see 10 to 20 quetzals there day after day after day feeding. Quetzals are found in almost all the national parks and reserves in the country. Very common. And then we have the subspecies whose tail is a couple inches longer than the one found in Costa Rica. So the central tail feathers are almost 3 feet long. Beautiful, beautiful bird. Motmots, we have the claim to fame that we have more motmots than any country in the world. They believe that is where they radiated out from whenever they came into existence. We have 7 species, almost an 8. There's a species from Mexico, comes all the way down to Guatemala. It's found just on the other side of the border. Keelbill motmot is one of the prized birds. It does range at Costa Rica, but it's not very easy to find there, but we're at the center of the range, and it's quite common in Honduras. Toucans, we have 5 species of toucans, 3 little ones and 2 big ones. Wood creepers is not the same as your brown creeper. That's a different family. Wood creepers or fernards or ovenbirds, they're in their own families. These things like trees, kind of like woodpeckers. And they're very hard to tell apart, a lot of them. They're really simple. There's a whole plate just of wood creepers. Flycatchers is our biggest family. So obviously a lot of these are also very hard to tell apart. And all your North American Empidonnax all migrate down into Central America, and they all mix in together, and some keep going to South America, further south of us, but when they do settle in their wintering habitats, they settle out by habitat, and they all look almost identical, but if you're in the highlands and pine oak forest, you know it's a Hammond's flycatcher. And if they're in dry forest, in these intermountain dry valleys, you know it's a least flycatcher, or if you're around the lake, you know it's a willow flycatcher, and they give one note, that's it. So all the warblers and flycatchers, all the migratory species have one single call note. That's how we have to learn all these migrants by one note. But obviously things like this, they're very loud and obnoxious. The great kiskadee, they have lots of ruckus. Wrens, my favorite family out of all. We have 16 species of wrens. During my bird work, I found 4 new species for Honduras. And I love the wren vocalizations. And so I kept the 2 original plates from the book of the wrens. It's a cloud forest species in the upper right, rufous-browed wren. And we get down to wood warblers, the 2nd biggest family. And the vast majority of these 51 species are migrants from all across North America. This is obviously the Blackburnian. This keeps going through Honduras, keeps going further to the south of us. We do have a few resident wood warbler species that stay there, breed, and sing beautiful songs, just like your warblers sing up here, which we never get to hear. And tanagers, we're not like Colombia or Ecuador, some of those countries, but we do have a few flashy tanagers. This is one of them, beautiful, beautiful bird. And now this includes the seed eaters and other birds that don't look like tanagers at all, but that's where they're lumped right now. So in 1993, when I was in Peace Corps, I was bird watching very informally. I had a really cheap pair of Tasco binoculars that lasted a few years. When I went into the country, there were only 701 species of birds. And pretty much knew that the country list was going to grow. So in the year 2000, a friend of ours named Ricardo Steiner, he was really big in the conservation movement and worked with different nonprofits. He contacted me and he said, Robert, we need a bird watching guide. There's a board of directors coming from Washington, it's the Rare Center for Tropical Conservation. They're going to have their annual board meeting at this brand new lodge that opened up, Piconito Lodge. and they need a bird guide. And I said, Fito, I'm not a bird guide, I barely know the birds. And he goes, you're the only guy that can do this. And I was going, okay. And so I went, and I was hired to be the bird guide for this board of directors. Little did I know, on this board was Robert Ridgely at that point. So he's one of the preeminent ornithologists for the New World. So he was my first mentor in bird watching and getting to know birds. So a pretty hefty mentor, I would say. So at that point, that's when I realized, I go, wow, people pay to watch birds? And I go, wow, this is really cool. So backtracking a little bit, I had come back to Honduras after Peace Corps, and I wanted to do butterfly farming for export, just like I did during Peace Corps, and it failed for numerous reasons. And so I was at this point in my life, it's like, how am I going to be able to stay in Honduras? How am I going to make a living? And it was a rough go until I learned that people paid to see birds. And so I went headfirst into the birding world, and I had to upgrade my equipment from Tasco binoculars to something a little more waterproof down there. And what I quickly learned is that we had no book for Honduras. So I had to carry around a North American guide, Ridgely's Panama, Mexico guide, the birds of Costa Rica, to be able to identify all the birds that were in Honduras, because I consider Honduras the Darien Gap of northern Central America, and I've proven that with the birds and now the butterflies. The only book we had is that one in the upper right, it's the monograph I told you about, but there are no pictures in it. That is a compendium of more than 20,000 specimens that left the country over about a 150-year period. So when collectors went down, the very famous collectors, collected these birds, worked the skins in the field, and they sold them to museums around the world, the Smithsonian, Paris, Germany, everywhere around the world. So this author, he took it upon himself to do this monograph. He went to all those museums, got all the data from every single bird that was collected in Honduras, and did this book. And so for every single species that was in a collection, it was there when it was collected, what sex it was, etc. That's all I had. And so that was kind of the base for me to go around, start looking for birds. The rock wren is an example. It barely reaches us in western Honduras. We went to a place where it hadn't been seen in 105 years, and the bird was still there. Just nobody was looking. Ocellated quail was one that they're all over the place in the country still. So obviously a lot of habitats were more degraded since the book was done in 1968, but there was still a lot of habitat to look around. So I went around doing all this bird work literally by myself. There was not a single recreational bird watcher in the entire country. There were only maybe 2 or 3 biologists that did bird-related work, but that was mostly when a power line was going to go in, a road was going to get paved in somewhere, they were going to put it in a shrimp farm in the south, whatever. They weren't really recreational birders or people going out to try to unravel the diversity of birds in the country, because they were not producing the country records. But we're going to start changing that. So I started doing big trips all over the country. This is an example of a remote field camp in eastern Honduras, which we call La Mosquitia, where we'd sometimes fly out or boat out to very remote places, hire local guides to carry a lot of food, all the camping gear, and make a camp in the middle of the jungle. And from there we would go out different directions every day and see what we could see. So that's kind of old style inventorying. So I kept doing this year after year after year. As I had mentioned, I stayed in close contact with Ridgely, did numerous trips with him as well. And he goes, if you really want to learn the birds, you really need to know the vocalizations. And so back then, everything was still taped. It was all analog. But even then, there were only a couple tapes for Costa Rica, a couple tapes for Mexico. And I said, well, I want to learn these things, and I want to record them. What do you use? So he had that equipment. You can barely see it there on one side. That's a Sony cassette recorder that weighs 5,000 pounds, connected to a Sennheiser microphone. It's the exact same setup that he used for many years in Panama and Ecuador. And so that thing weighs heavy, and you're leaning to one side at the end of the day, and your back really hurt. That was a heavy piece of equipment. So I spent more than 6 years recording bird sounds across the country, from the highland, lowlands, east to west, north to south. And that's how I learned the bird sounds. I probably did about 700 recordings of bird sounds. And at the end of that time, I did an actual CD, the Bird Sounds of Honduras, that had about 500 recordings on it. And that helped me learn the sounds, and they really, really sunk in. So in many cases, you put in a blank cassette, you record something, because if you don't know the sounds, record it, hit rewind, play, that bird would come back. And we're talking anything from quetzal to a hawk eagle to craigs and rails. Every bird imaginable out there will respond to his own sound. One time, numerous times, I had the cassette for Costa Rica, and I would play sounds of what I thought was that species, and I knew it was that species, but they wouldn't come in, because there's variation in vocalizations from country to country. And so I had to get my own recordings of all these birds. So sometimes people go down to different countries, or in Honduras, and they try to use Merlin and other apps, and they play the sound, and I can hear it and say, that's not Honduran. I go, that's a Mexican recording. That's a Costa Rican recording. And a lot of times the birds will not even answer, they won't even respond, because it's not their dialogue. So after more than 15 years of field work, I was able to find 40 country records. And so this is something that's very hard to do nowadays. 20 of those 40 were in the remote eastern Honduras, off in the rainforest. I was telling Gene about a story. We had camp in one remote site. In a 3-hour period, right in our camp, we had 3 country records without even moving from our camp. We had 2 wrens and a great jacamar, which is the northern range for all those species. Nowadays, it'd be very, very difficult to be able to do that. So I was also documenting species, again looking at the old monograph of birds that were considered uncommon to rare. And what I found is that most of those species were actually fairly common to common, as long as you got to the right place at the right time of year. So all this started gaining more and more momentum. We now had a few more people interested in bird watching in the country, all Hondurans for the most part. And then I had made contact with somebody at the office of USAID in the capital, it's American, in charge of the environmental department down there. And his name's Peter. I said, Peter, let's try to get this thing going. Let's offer a bird watching event in Honduras. And so this was the very first event that lasted 3 weeks. We weren't starting small. We were going for the gusto. So Robert originally came down. The Institute of Tourism offered a sponsored package, and so it was only like $400 to go and attend this event. We had people from all over the U.S. come. We had a little guide course there. I brought people from Nicaragua and Mexico to help us guide groups, because there were no guides in the country. I was the only one. And so we had this 3-week event, which was a huge success. And so we're getting rolling more and more and more. The USAID office said this should be really good for the environment. You're utilizing a natural resource in a sustainable manner. These parks, national parks and reserves, are totally underutilized. And bird watching was a great economic stimulus for them. And so they started financing bird guide courses. And so I was always the lead instructor in these courses. We started out with a beginner's course that went for 10 to 12 days. And those who went through that often went on to an advanced bird guide course that was 3 modules. They learned all the technical aspects, the calls, they were tested, had to do worksheets. And then I taught them the whole business component of it, doing itineraries and how to do budgets and everything. And a few of them are actually guiding internationally now. So it's a really, really great program. And it's paid by your tax dollars. So right around 2010, 2011, I was going through a midlife crisis to somebody I was married to. I was almost ready to leave Honduras. I was actually looking for a job in Washington or some big organization when I attended the Midwest Birding Symposium in Ohio. I actually had a little table there. And during that event, I met this famous artist, John Sill. He's a well-known artist, especially farther east here. And I talked to him about doing a book. So I was getting a better grip on the Birds of Honduras, distribution, what species are there. And he said, yeah, it's a wonderful project. He goes, let's do it. And at the same event, I flew my mom out there. I flew her all over the place. So she was at the table, and I walked around and looked to see other tables, and I came to one stand that belonged to a big publisher, probably one of the biggest publishers in North America. I'm not going to say who they are. And I mentioned the project to the representative there, and thinking maybe they'll have interest in helping us publish or finance this book. And she thought for not even 10 seconds and then told me in my face, your project is too small for us. That's what she told me. So I probably, because I'm maybe stubborn or half German and half Mexican, I don't take no for an answer very quickly. And so I said, and I told John, I go, well, that publisher's not interested. Do you know of any? And he tried contacting others, Texas, and all kinds of Princeton, all the, none of them had any interest in helping us with this project. But I really, really wanted to do this first bird guide. So I ended up staying in Honduras. I didn't leave. So it was a decision for the best. So not too long, actually before I met John, thanks to Fito, my friend, that's Fito from right to left, it's the second person, oh there I am in the picture too. Missouri started taking interest in Honduras, and there's the late Brad Jacob, and there's even Rick, and there's Gene. So I believe this was their first trip to Honduras, that's a Picomito launch. And so I just happened to be there with another private birdwatching client, Michael Douglas and Catherine Zeta-Jones were there too. We had the whole lodge to ourselves. But Fito introduced me to Brad and everybody who was working up in here in Missouri at that time. And so that's how the relationship really started with everybody here in Missouri. And not too long ago after that, we did a big rafting trip in eastern Honduras. It's 8 days of rafting through the virgin wilderness. And so we're forming a pretty good bond and relationship with everybody up here. And so Brad, he was actually my second mentor for bird watching. When I had separated from my ex-wife, I took a whole year off of guiding, and I sat down for an entire year to write the first draft of that book. It was literally 6-7 days on the computer, about 10 hours a day to write the first draft. And Brad was helping me formulate my ideas on what I wanted to get across to the bird watching community and the actual content of the book. So I thank him for that. So again, getting back to working on the book, so I spent a year writing the first draft of the text, and I had to figure out how to finance this book. So if you look at the book, the plates down there, that is 73 original plates, 1,000 illustrations. Anybody have an idea what that would cost nowadays? They charge by the bird now. So the plates you look at right there, eventually I hired a second and third artist to paint the plates. That was $1,000 a plate. You probably couldn't find another artist to do that nowadays, $1,000 for a plate. So I asked the artist if I could keep the plates after I got them. We scanned them to work on the book so I could sell them to help finance the book, to actually pay them for the plates. So there was a lot of creative financing going on and fundraising. And so there were two artists in the States, one in England. As fast as they painted a plate, they took a picture, and I generated an email list, a group list. As fast as they painted them, they sold. And so the people were sending in the $1,000. I only charged $1,000, the same that the artists were charging me. So at that point, it was just before that with Brad and the Department of Conservation that they set up a matching grant program. And so the director at that time said, we will match dollar for dollar the money that comes in over a 2-year fiscal period. And so we were able to get, it was a maximum of $15,000 a year, with $27,000 of donations went in, where actually they were purchasing the plates, and so they matched that with $27,000. So that was a very significant portion of the money to pay the artists to begin with. So we were working on the plates. I had met Olivia. She was studying biology, ended up graduating degree in ecotourism, and so I put her to work. So she's working on the individual range maps for every single species. That was a year alone, just doing those little range maps. And kept working on the book. This other guy up here is our very good friend, a graphic design specialist. He can do anything on a computer. And so you can see here some of the people who bought some of the original plates. When I finally went and picked up all the plates and we scanned them, we were done with them, we mailed them off to all the proud owners around the world. Here in Missouri, they got a collection of the plates as well. So very, very happy people to also to have helped us. And the gentleman in the lower right corner, just a short story, took him out for a bird walk in Copan in Western Honduras. He gave me his card. So if you ever need help with anything, contact me. I kept this card for years and years. Little did I know who he was. He was an executive at a huge bank in England. And so I contacted him. Chris, I go, we're starting to do the bird book on Honduras. He goes, how much do you need? I was going, okay. So we ended up writing 2 very healthy checks to help offset the balance of the plates. And there we went. So in January 2015, 3 years from start to finish, self-publishing, self-financing a 550-page book with original art. So to do something like that nowadays, almost nobody would touch a project like that. It is a big chunk of time to be in contact with the printers and the editors and the graphic design people. And I had to learn how to format what birds were going to go on which plate, to tell the artist what to paint, sent them hundreds of thousands of photographs. It's a lot of work, a lot of work. And so we held this huge event that went on all day, January 2015. So we had a pretty good group of people from Missouri down at this great and very memorable event. So that was in 2015. Right about then, we had a new president in the country. My president was the president of Honduras. A complete change in government, very different attitude altogether. And they were very receptive to at least listen to what bird watching was about as an economic stimulus. And the gentleman up in the upper right corner in the center was the president of the National Chamber of Tourism. He actually, one day, he canceled all his appointments and he went bird watching with us all day long, which was really incredible. And that was actually before the event in January. So when he went to the event and he spoke, he really knew what he was talking about. That bird watching was going to be something really great for the country. Down the lower right corner in the upper left, that's the former president of Honduras. I tried my best to not only tell them how bird watching could benefit the entire country and the economy, but then when I started talking about what they really needed to do was actually protect the parks, start building basic infrastructure, training park guards, allowing the conditions for investors to come in to put in eco-lodges like they have in Belize and Costa Rica. They really didn't want to hear about that. They thought that people could just come and watch the birds and leave all their dollars behind. So the relationship kind of crumbled after a couple of years, but I tried. And there was at least a lot of hype from them people. But it also stimulated a lot of grassroots bird watching in Honduras. So we had the first book out, even though it was in English. We had a lot of people interested in bird watching. We used to import binoculars, buy them wholesale. We sold a lot of binoculars and straps. And so there are a lot more bird watchers in the country at that point in time. So, going back to my childhood, I told you how I had these books as a kid that I would sometimes take to school, and which was a huge stimulus in my life, looking at a butterfly book, California, and seeing a zebra longwing that's found in southern Florida. Wow, these are cool butterflies. I actually got to see one in Florida when I graduated from high school. But then I realized that in most countries, most of these natural history guides are almost never produced in the country's native language. Why is that? Because they're published by people who need to see an economic return on their investment. And to translate any size book into a country's native language, whether it's Spanish or Portuguese or whatever, that implies investing money in it. And so they look at, if they're not really conservation oriented, they're just looking at a return on their dollar. So I did not think like that. I said, we need to get this book done in Spanish for the Hondurans, because there are a lot of Hondurans that do not speak or read or write English. So I put together a team of 20 volunteers from the US and Honduras, some were ex-Peace Corps, and we translated that book in 2 years. And I got enough donations. Again, we got quite a bit of donations here from the US. And we did a run of about 1,400 copies of the Spanish edition. And we translated into Spanish, it added 50 pages of text, because Spanish is a very lengthy language. So this book was actually bigger. And the only thing we changed it up were we inserted these two images in the front. This first one says, lower down your slingshots and pick up a pair of binoculars. And the other one is various texts and saying, don't buy parrots and birds that are sold on the streets. I deserve to be free. That's the only thing we changed in the entire book. And so, over a course of about a year and a half, with the help of many friends, and we had more bird watchers in the country, we set up 5 events, regional events, to give away books to schools. And so most of these schools were elementary schools that were around or the periphery of different reserves and parks. And so we ended up giving almost over 400 books away to over 10,000 school children in rural areas. So that was a very worthwhile project. And you can see in this picture, this is the whole library of one little school. That's all the books they have, but at least they have a bird book in there. So today, as we speak, there are now 803 species that have been recorded, or we've added over 100 species to the country list. I added 40, so that means other people added over 60 species. So there are now 10, 11 grassroots birdwatching clubs in the country, an ornithological association of seabird and merlin. We have, this huge movement of bird watching in the country, and every day there are more and more new bird watchers there. And some of my former students are even holding festivals and events in the country during different times of the year. So it's been a huge, huge success. And so getting back down to the relationship between Missouri and specifically where we live, this is where we live in Emerald Valley. We have about 186 species of birds. So 46 are migrants. Some of these are passage migrants that keep going to Panama, Costa Rica, or South America. About 21 species of these are on the breeding bird atlas for Missouri. Birds that overwinter and stay on our property. So that's a pretty significant amount of birds. And so getting back to where we are, it's a mid-elevation rainforest. So there's lowland rainforest just below us where there's a big lake, and then behind us is a big cloud forest. So we get this mixing of species. And so this is just a few samples of overwintering birds on the property. Great crested flycatchers, warblers. It's not huge numbers. So many places where you go, whether it's pine oak forest or broadleaf forest, you typically don't see big, massive flocks, but they're kind of just scattered around. And these are all in our yard right now, all these birds. And so one of the birds that's, other than the golden winged warbler, that's really been on the radar for conservationists here in North America is the wood thrush. So the statistics that I have found online say they've been declining since 1966, and they're probably at half of what they were historically as a population. And so they obviously do that by monitoring nesting sites up here. And so you probably all know many different reasons why they've been disappearing here in North America. But there have been people also interested on where they go in the winter time, which is about 6-7 months of the year. And what they found, and one person who did a study, I believe it was in Pennsylvania, they put photo transmitters on them, and they found that the birds, breeding birds in their area, actually overwintered in Honduras, which is really cool. So what you see in the map there, some of the overwintering grounds for the wood thrush. This species is pretty common on our property, and there are no wild dogs there. There are no wild cats. We don't use any kind of herbicides or pesticides on the property. So we're giving them a very safe environment to live in while they're there. Also, due to the protection measures that we have done specifically on our property, all these mammals have started coming back. So these are all small mammals. There never used to be a single agouti there. There never used to be paca there. All these things were hunted out, or they were poisoned because they were eating people's crops. Since we started protecting it, all these things started coming back on their own. We haven't introduced anything. So from neighboring forests and neighboring properties, they have come back. In a couple of cases, the agouti tried to come back and they shot him because he wasn't on our property. But they are now have come back and they're actually breeding on our property. We've seen babies there. The paca can get up to 30 pounds as a prize game meat, that big rodent. That is one of the first things to disappear in an area. Tapirs, paca, jaguars, anything that's like a guan or turkey size. But we found paca on our property last year. Also ocelot, we've now found ocelot on our property. So that's what you can see when there's direct protection of a place without even reintroducing anything. That's a female gray fox. We have short-tailed weasel, they've seen Mexican porcupine, Mexican anteater as well. So it's, even though we don't have a government decree for our property, it's a de facto private nature reserve. So we got all these great mammals, almost 200 species of birds, and an added bonus. So we'll get to that right now. So Olivia and I, we did, and then I personally did more than about 20 years of bird work in the country. We had all these bird watchers, all these people looking at birds, doing eBird and everything. I guess I'm going to step back a little bit, and I'm going to go back to my butterflies. That's what I was in love with. It was my passion, from a very early age. And we knew or had a feeling that the butterfly work was going to even surpass the bird work. And we'll show you why. So kind of like the birds, we didn't have anything to go off of as a base for our field work and our studies in butterflies, except for this publication that came out in 2012 done by the University of Florida, who did numerous trips there. And they came up with a list of 861 butterflies for the country, stuff they had collected and stuff that was in Smithsonian and other museums. We knew that number was way short of what it potentially could be, so we started going back into the field, all the places we went to look at birds, and I went to for almost 2 decades, and then we had to go back and look at all the butterflies. Oh shucks, gotta go back. So out we went. Some people are opposed to collecting butterflies, but in countries like this where very little or almost nothing has been done on insects, even butterflies, we found it necessary to do a representative collection. And so there were species that are very common. There are many common ones we may only have 1 or 2 of in the collection, but things that are much more obscure, little skippers and hair streaks and metal marks comprise the biggest part of our collection. And so off we went, collecting and photographing. We did a lot of photographing, and you see in the book, most of the photos are butterflies living in the wild. So I'm not going to go into details on all the butterfly species and families. We're just going to show you a few cool pictures here. So that one you saw in some books is called a ghost skipper. There are 5 species of just those. There's another whole group called ruby eyes or scarlet eyes, and these are crepuscular nocturnal skippers that are rare for the most part. In most countries, on our property alone, we have found 30 species of these just on our property. It's spectacular, and they're big, some of them almost 3 inches across. The nymphalids, or the brushfoots, include the glasswings, owls, aviates, morphos, the longwings, daggerwings, sisters, crackers. Very diverse family. This is actually a satyr. This is a clear-winged satyr with red blush on it. A hair streak, big, beautiful hair streak. That's one on, I think, my finger. Yep, that's my finger. Called a carousing jewel mark. As flashy as it is, that's actually a common little butterfly. This is also common right in our front yard on our zinnias. They're found almost all year. And then you get into all kinds of mimicry. So if you know about mimicry, it's when in butterflies, a distasteful or palatable butterfly imitates a poisonous or distasteful one. So if you remember the slide with the glasswing butterfly, that whole entire group are all distasteful because all their larvae feed on nightshades. And nightshades have all these different chemicals in them. This is actually a sulfur butterfly. This is the only clear-winged sulfur butterfly in the world. And so it often flies with the glasswings, gaining protection. And that is also on our property. Kite swallowtails, gorgeous things. You have the zebra swallowtail up here. Very similar. So how much do we know after doing almost 7 years of work? We have found that we still know very, very little. This is one species that was endemic to Costa Rica, the Guanacaste area. We found it on our property. So it's not endemic there anymore. And someone else I know found one in Belize. And this came to one of our paper baits, a place where we go to look for these crepuscular skippers. And then one day it showed up in our mist flowers. So this very secretive crepuscular butterfly that lives in the forest is out in the open feeding on flowers. With just one of these millions and millions of little points and details that nobody really ever knew about. Another skipper found on our property and then reappears in Peru. There are 2 specimens from Panama, historical specimens. No one has seen it there since or anywhere in between us and Peru. And so we thought this was another new species. For science, we sent the leg to do DNA work, and they said, no, this is the same one that's in Peru. Okay. Another one that's found on our property that we also thought was new for science, described from one specimen in Panama and has never been seen since. This is found on our property and reappears in Bolivia and is found nowhere else in between. So there's obviously a lot that we don't know about in general and other Lepidopterus in Central America, in the whole region. So birds are pretty well covered. If any single bird wanders into Costa Rica, somebody's going to see it. But when we start talking about butterflies, we are still almost at ground level. So in 2012, we went from 861 to today, almost 1,300 species. So Olivia and I have added over 300 country records to the country list. But we also have other young Hondurans sending us photographs. No one else is collecting, but sending us photographs. And they're also adding country records. And quite a few of their photos are represented in this first book. But also looking in the back of the book, you'll see there's a list there of almost 500 more species that could occur in Honduras. So we're still looking for more and more species. Within the first 14 months of surveying butterflies across the country, we already had 3 new species for science in 14 months, and we're already up to 6 so far. This one was named after a gentleman's wife, not wife, his mother. This one I named after my mother. It's endemic and only found on our property at Emerald Valley. And even on an adjacent property during the mistflower blooming season, I've not found it, only known from our place. That's the female. And so a couple years ago, we got to describe and publish and name two of these 6 species. So that's out of the Journal of Tropical Lepidoptera out of Florida. So we're doing a lot of research work as well. So we're getting going on all this field work. COVID comes along, but that did not slow us down. So we were still doing field work, but then we also really got down to tedious work on the collection, organizing the collection. We were working with experts from around the world on identifying a lot of these, and ended up doing a big digital database, 2/3 of which are actually our photographs from the field. Then we started photographing all the specimens in the collection, and then we're putting in all photos of the species taken in the wild, and started putting the book together. And there's a sample plate. There's 1,700 photographs in this book. And this year, we did it, the first edition, the Guide to the Butterflies of Honduras. Tricia and her sister were down at our property this year. We had a very formal ceremony in the middle of the jungle. We had about 100 people there. Great, great event. Our power went out later, and then it started to rain. It didn't stop us.
Nope.
Great, wonderful event. So the cover features 4 of the 6 new species for science. The little brown one in the left corner I found in Olivia's home village, close in El Salvador border. Eventually I will name that one after her. She is. 2023. And so this is the first edition of this book. And in 10 or 15 years, we're going to do one last book. And that is it. So we're going to take 10, 15 years to do more field work. My goal is to personally add 500 country records to the list. We're 180 away, which we'll probably do. This was another new one for science that was in a collection, university collection on the North Coast. We went up and checked it out. We had a little butterfly tucked away in the corner that they've had for 8 years. I photographed it, sent it to an expert, and he said, that's new for science, just by looking at the photograph. And right after we sent the files to the printer for this book, it appears in our garden. and appeared in our mistflowers the first time in 6 years. Only once has it appeared in our garden. I photographed the heck out of it. That's why it's not on the cover, because it was in the file somewhere. And I was going to collect it until I bumped the bush and it was gone. So could not get it to do the necessary DNA and genitalia work to be able to describe and publish it. Maybe in 6 years it will come back. We'll see. So getting down to the last part of my presentation, show you a few things here. Does anybody have any idea how many square miles this geographic area is? Canada and lower 48 states. Any idea? Million square miles? More?
100 million. 100 million?
Not quite that much. Anybody have any idea how many butterflies are found in the same geographic area? We'll show you. It's about 7 million square miles and 725 species of butterflies. And so why do I show you this? This is our place, 7 million times smaller, and we have more species of butterflies than all of North America. So a lot of people don't and still do not believe that we could have that many species of butterflies in such a small area. Why? Because we're not Costa Rica, we're not Panama, we're not the Amazon. Typically, the further north you go geographically, the less species you have per given area, whether it's hectare or acre or whatever. And so I'm kind of throwing this paradigm out the window for the neotropics. How could we have 730 species on 50 acres? Well, a lot of people didn't believe me, so I went to the wrong place. I'll come back to that one. Oh, I will. So, just right before I came up to Texas and on this trip, somebody dug way down into my Facebook page 6 years ago. They found this thing that I posted, this post, where we were at 320 species for Emerald Valley, et cetera, et cetera. So I was just like super ecstatic that we reached 320 species on the 50 acres, and that was 6 years ago. And so about 5 years ago, I just wanted to publish an article on our property, and of course we weren't even close to 700 species yet, but I started drafting the manuscript that I wanted to publish, and it took about 3 years to write it, and when I finally got this published and I went through the whole peer review process, 3 years later we were at 704 species, and this was published in October last year in the same journal. The chief editor of this journal is ecstatic that something like this is actually coming out of Honduras. He's really, really happy. And now we're up to 730 species, and still finding them. So one of the big pushes behind why we have such a big diversity are these mist flowers. If any of you have ever seen that flower, I've been to Texas or gone to the Butterfly Festival that they've been doing for 26 years there. One of the popular flowers is this one, and this we found by accident in our yard when we bought the first property. There was a corn and bean field there. Obviously, we weren't going to keep cultivating corn and beans, and all these weeds started growing up, and this was one of the weeds that came up. The seeds were already in the ground. I saw this plant covered with butterflies, one plant, and so our gardener had instructions: anything that looks like this, that's sprouting, you are to leave, let it grow. We did. We let it grow. Then we started propagating them with rooting hormone. We now have entire mist flower gardens with cement pathways and stuff, so we can hold our own festival. And so last year was the first time that I went to the Butterfly Festival in Texas. Little did I know that they had the mist flower too, but I found ours just completely by accident. And we are now going on our 5th annual Emerald Valley Butterfly Festival. And this is now an international event. And it's the only event of its kind south of Texas. So we're very proud to have the only event of its kind in Latin America and the only book of its kind in Latin America. So this is the first book that depicts all the species for a known country with accompanying text. So we've been really, really going gung-ho on this butterfly work. We invite kids, come in and do a coloring contest. Other young kids come in and take pictures of the butterflies in the garden with their little cameras and their cell phones. So it's a great national event. So we're still promoting nature tourism with all the age groups. So getting here toward the very end, we're also now starting to write and send out a biannual digital newsletter if people are interested in receiving one. And so here's our conservation partners. We still work with everyone here in Missouri and the University of Florida, the McGuire Center, who continues to publish all my articles that I'm publishing. So we're kind of looking at what the biggest focus of what we want to do at Emerald Valley is. We decided just to take a stance at where we are because we have so many mammals, so many birds, so many butterflies on one place that we really think it's important to start acquiring more land around us. So even while I was on this trip, a neighbor who lives not far from here went and saw Olivia, was looking for me, is offering us a big chunk on the other side of this ridge. So we have about 4 people right now that are offering us almost 45 more acres. And so our goal is to do more fundraising and get more donations, getting grants. It's super difficult. Nobody's really interested in helping with this kind of stuff in Honduras, because I know people in nature conservation and other organizations, we could have 1 billion birds and 1 billion butterflies, but they will not work in Honduras. But it doesn't mean we're not going to stop trying. So we're going to keep fundraising and try to acquire all those parcels which are adjacent to ours and connected, acquire them one by one, just to conserve them. So little by little, by our house, we're building very tiny eco lodge with maybe 3 or 4 cabins, a little eatery, and that's it. And all the rest of this is for protection. We also know that there are people interested in doing a remote surveying program here. We hope we'll see with a motor station. They put up sensors up here, so we own all the way up to this ridge line up here, which will probably make a great place for one of these sensors. So we have our own electricity. We have enough electricity to light up a whole village because there are 2 primary lines. We have a fiber optic line just for us, so we can have as much internet or Wi-Fi as we want as well. So we hope some of you will be able to help out with that. So that's the end of the presentation. So, a little bit of what we've done. So does anybody have any questions or comments?
Aren't you afraid to leave home? Like one of those butterflies is going to come by?
Definitely. Definitely. Well, when the mist flowers start blooming, which is a 4 to 6 week period coming up really soon, I do not pick up a hammer or anything. We are in the garden all day, every day. I take turns with the lid, with the cameras, monitoring what species come into our garden, and that's why we find every single butterfly that comes in. But we also use canopy traps, different bait traps, fruit traps, to see what species are there.
Is that when you have the festival too, when the mist flowers are blooming?
Yeah, the festival lasts 5 full days. So there's one day at one national park, there's a day at a friend's who we've helped build up his mist flower gardens close by, and then 3 full days at our place. So we hold that during the 2nd and 3rd week of January each year. So it's a great event. It's a lot of fun. The last event we recorded 320 species in 5 days between the whole group. Just a few butterflies. So you can imagine having a flower-filled garden with lantana and other things, and there are clouds of butterflies. So in the middle of the rainforest, all these species come out of the canopy and descend into the garden, where you get to see them at eye level. Species that come out of the rainforest into our garden. When they're done feeding, they go back into the rainforest. It's almost unfathomable the amount and volume of species of butterflies that are seen right there in that time period. Any other questions?
Is your mist flower related to our mist flower we have up here? The same?
There is one, at least in Texas, it's the same, even same species, genus and species.
So we call here, it's an ageratum. I don't know if they changed it.
That's a composite, but it's that big. We also have ageratum, but it's that big. These mist flowers, if it leans up against something, it'll grow like 15 feet tall. It's kind of a leaner, so we have to trim them like 3 times a year. So we just did, Olivia did the last trim right now, so all the energy that's getting will be focused on all the buds, producing buds at eye level. Yeah, but we do have ageratum too, which is good for butterflies. You got a question?
Do you ever do any mothing there?
We have, very close to our house, a permanent setup for moths with a little transparent roof over it. We can put a black light and a high mercury vapor, other type of light there. I do not personally do that because of time and my energy level, and we do not have the space in our house. Our collection is on the 2nd floor of our house, and so we just don't have the space for that. But they say the ratio from moths to butterflies, I've heard, is now like 20 to 1. So if we have 700 species of butterflies, we have 14,000 species of moths, just on our property. We've had collectors there before, insect collectors. One of them found a beetle that looks like a BB. So you think it's a sow bug, but it looks like a black BB, and it's a beetle. And he said these things are extremely rare in Central America. And he had 5 black lights up in the garden. That's one of the things he caught. So who knows? I mean, there's a lot of work that could be done there. It was a dream of ours to build kind of like this, a nature center type thing there, where school kids could go in and do worksheets and have interactive exhibits and stuff, have a whole herbarium, have a whole professional insect collection and everything, but I don't know, there's just not enough time and not enough energy and funds to do all of that. So. Any questions?
Do you ever worry about collecting, that you might be collecting the last existing individual of that rare species?
No, but there's still very little known about the ecology of tropical butterflies. I imagine if somebody came in and cleared out all of our rainforest in that whole entire area, maybe my mom's butterfly could disappear. Then we'd have to look elsewhere. But our place is protected, and so we know that butterfly's gonna, we only might see 1 or 2 a year, that's it. But we know the habitat's not there, we're not using herbicides and pesticides, so it's gonna show up.
Are you affiliated with any universities?
I am not, doesn't mean we haven't tried, but it's been, the problem is that the bad stigmas that Honduras has had forever, universities cannot back students to go down. They can go down if they want, but there's like no official backing. There is one American who gives classes in herpetology and other classes here in the US. He takes a group each year down to a property nearby us and does incredible herpetology work to discover 25 new species for science and everything. But in terms of us, what we do where we're at, so far nothing with universities. And I know people in the Nature Conservancy Science Department in Ohio, they're just not interested in working in Honduras. I tried. So we do what we can do.
Does Emerald Valley have a population of the ruby-throated hummingbird during the winter months?
I've seen that once. So that hummingbird, when it overwinters, it's typically in the Pacific lowlands and dry valleys, or in the highest mountains and open areas. It does not live in cloud forests. So in these high mountain areas where there's agriculture and salvias blooming and stuff, we see a lot of ruby throats up in there. But only one time has one come through our property, and it got chased away by the meanies there. Any other questions?
What bird families go after your butterflies? Are you worried about
Yellow-bellied flycatcher and the kiskadee. Yeah, they're not allowed in our garden. We don't do anything to them, but we chew them away. Yeah. We find bugs somewhere. We actually have 2 butterflies that are pests on our mist flowers, and they lay massive amounts of eggs. And if we don't collect the eggs and the larvae or whatever, those larvae will entirely strip and kill one plant. They're nasty butterflies. Any other questions?
Robert, I saw the faces of the kids. They all look really happy and everything. I bet they've never had this kind of a resource before. You invite them to talk about nature and so forth instead of something to use or abuse. It's something that could be beneficial for them in the long run.
Yeah, we've had kids come, apart from the festival, we've had kids come down, school kids, and we give them a talk on our front porch. You know, bring out the bird book, the Spanish bird book, the butterfly book, and a few cases from the collection, and show them these things, and they're just hard to say what they think at all, but they're blown away by it. But we know it has a positive effect because we've had kids come down and they found like a boa eating somebody's chickens up in the village, and they bring us a big sack with a big boa in it, so we can let it go on the property. So one time they brought us a baby woolly opossum. It's a rainforest opossum that's kind of tangerine colored. So we let that one go too. So we know it, reaching out to the kids is the best thing possible.
Robert, if Missourians or whoever comes down to eat a bird or a butterfly, it's been my experience from birding in Honduras that there are items we can take with us that are very needed and welcomed by young people. What would you suggest would be the most appropriate, most useful items for birders or butterfliers to take with us to Honduras?
That's a good question. Often people will bring books in Spanish, like Tricia did when she came down, children's books in Spanish, blank paper and coloring pens, but if you can find a used pair of binoculars to bring down, we find people who need binoculars. It doesn't have to be a used Zeiss or Swarovski, any of that kind of stuff, but a pair that's functioning well, and we will give get binoculars to kids who need them, young people who need them. Could be, because a while back, when I used to import binoculars, optics for the tropics, there was a good program going where we not only brought in binoculars to sell, but the organization also collected used binoculars. And sometimes when clients, birdwatching clients would come down, they'd bring down each 3 or 4 pairs of binoculars, used binoculars. So they were collected for us. No, we're not going to send out butterfly nets with everybody. No, we don't want to do that. But we have now another kid who's collecting for us. In his front yard, he has numerous flowering trees. He's gotten country records right in his front yard up on the north coast, and I lent him in that. Any other questions?
But another thing I find fascinating that not everybody might know is about we can identify birds here by their calls. We know exactly, what the bird is saying, like mating and so forth. When they go down there, they don't have that, right? Just chirp.
When a single note call, that's it.
So over 8 months, they're speaking a different language.
Yep, that's it.
I've tried to look up sounds of birds on it, like I'm going on a trip here soon, and I get stuff, but there's no sound on them on the videos. Is there? You had a birds voices of.
Right.
Can we buy that?
Yeah, that was a long time ago.
Oh, okay.
It used to be commercially available through a company in Northern Europe somewhere, and
Okay.
they folded a long time ago. But Xenocanto is a good resource. I think certain Merlin apps for different countries as well. So Xenocanto is complete. It's got like, 100,000 recording. You can look up in like hooded warbler, and if you look up Costa Rica, all you're going to get is that one chip note, because they don't sing down there.
Okay.
So when you go to Costa Rica, you hear this little lip smacking. It's either hooded warbler or Kentucky warbler.
Well,
So there is a difference. Any other questions? I do have, I think, 3 butterfly books available and only that one bird book. I do not want to take those back home with me. If anybody wants to buy them, and there are, you guys made some copies, great. So there are a few flyers here on Emerald Valley with a couple emails on there as well, if anybody's interested. So.
And I'm gonna, if you don't mind, if anybody would want to support the Emerald Valley, you can donate on the MOCHF.org webpage. We do have it's in our drop down for donations. If you want to support Friends of Emerald Valley of Honduras, it isn't on there. You can select that if you guys would be interested. Again, we think it's extremely honorable to want to protect this area. It's got such rich biodiversity. So we certainly, send money to Robert whenever we get donations in. So it helps him continue his work. So we think it's great.
Yes, we have to personally thank Tricia and the Heritage Foundation, who originally had us in there as the Butterflies of Honduras. We were fundraising to do this first book, and then I asked them to see if they could change it to Friends of Emerald Valley, and it is now. But I think we're the only entity outside of Missouri that's actually on the website to receive online donations. So I feel quite privileged to be there. There are not many states, let alone Nature Conservancy, whoever, who do a lot of projects. Almost none in Honduras. I think there are efforts in Costa Rica, Panama, wherever. But in terms of where we are, Honduras, Nicaragua, Guatemala, Salvador, is still this big black hole of lack of knowledge and overall lack of support in conservation efforts. And there's a lot of need everywhere for these kinds of things. So thank you guys for all this great support.
So let's start with Brad Jacobs and Rick Tom and Jean and David Reynolds.
And David Erickson.
David Erickson, yep. So very amazing. So it's.
Is there a limit to the donation you can make without it throwing up big warning signs like, what are you doing? Are you driving drugs or something?
No,
I know, it's a weird question, I'm sorry.
No, it is a good question.
It is a good question.
No, I have a personal dollar account, and because I guide internationally, and sometimes I get some pretty big chunks of money that go directly in my dollar account. None have ever been held for any reason whatsoever. Thank goodness. Yeah. Good call. Any other questions or comments? So again, thank you all for coming and hope you enjoyed the show. Hope we'll be back in the near future. Not
Yes,
so,
definitely.
Not such a long span.